interpreted or formulated by this right-wing government in a certain way that block minority from having any influence on decision making and policy making, as well as guaranteeing annexation in the long run.
Thank you. Tal, do you think that someone prepared, like in the political elite or the coalition, is any of our politicians expected or prevented that this is going to happen? This is what the protest and against this government is going to be that long and that massive.
So yeah, the justice minister just spoke the other day and said he was expecting the demonstrations. I don't think, however, that they were expecting such a resistance from the high-tech scene, Israeli executives and high-tech and economic power, with threatening to take the money out of the country, or the whole aspect of the economic protest is not really. It's not just a protest in the street. It's also a protest by the goals. They are saying we will not work here anymore and so on. And I think also the high-tech executive are also financing the streets, the demonstration on the street. They need a lot of money, buses. There's a lot of
this is actually the baby of Netanyahu, the startup nation.
Exactly.
This is his big ticket.
Exactly. They even call the protest, they call it disrupt, which is a total high-tech jargon.
Yeah.
They're using the words from the high-tech scene. They're calling it a disrupt. We had just a couple of days ago, we had a disrupt day in which they protested against the ministers wherever they wanted to make speeches. So the defense minister was not able to reach a scheduled speech because protesters gathered outside. The prime minister canceled a speech at a naval base. So it was a disrupt day. I'm not sure they thought it will go so far. Another big aspect of the protest we are seeing right now, where military people who are doing reserve duty, or some of them were doing even pilots or practicing as a reserves every week. Some of them are combative pilots who are taking part in Israel's military operations around the region.
It's a very sensitive issue. Like if you can speak about it in depth about the army and the refusal movement inside this very important issue and the whole issue in the Israeli society.
Yeah, so in Israel, military service is a mandatory service. Everybody has to do it unless you are ultra-Orthodox, of course. But when you were talking about reserve duty, every person who's done mandatory military remain in a reserve duty until the age around 45 and 50. So basically, almost all of the people between the age of 18 and 45 are
voluntary.
So the reserve duty is a voluntary, but it's a very so the military is a very part of everybody's daily life. Now, obviously, when many parts of this coalition who currently are in government did not do mandatory military service, neither the ultra-Orthodox, who are a big part of this government, plus many parts of the religious Zionism, who their leaders, where one is a convicted felon who had incitement convictions against the Arabs and incitement and convictions against
helping terror.
Sorry?
Assisting a terror organization. He
was convicted 8 times, and he was on trial for 53 times. This is the minister of national security, and of course, because of those convictions, he was not recruited to the military, so he's never done a military. And his partner in this government, the finance minister, also served maybe 3 weeks or so, because he was also a suspect in another occasion. So parts of the religious Zionism who are now in power did not serve in the military. Ultra-Orthodox did not serve in the military. So you have a huge group of ministers who never served in the Israeli military, whereas the public and are doing reserve duties for years. Now, some of those officers in the reserve duty, they claim that they will not serve anymore. It was it's not a light decision to take for people who this is their life.
Especially the pilots. So it's like
The
the prestigious
pilots and the tech units and the intel units. It's not easy for them to come up and say, but since it began a couple of weeks ago, it's like how do you say, it's like a snowball, right? It began and it's like it's taking now
one by one.
It's everywhere now. The severe announcement came out today, where you have 37 combative pilots from the unit that is doing the air raids in Syria, over Syria for the last couple of 6 to 7 years. These combative pilots came out today and in a letter and said, that's it. On Wednesday, we have their weekly training. We are not coming up for this weekly training. We will protest on that day. This is a combative.
For them, it's a revolutionary decision to make. Right?
It's not the officers' revolution, because they're not doing military steps to overtake the government. It's the opposite. They're taking back step and they're saying enough is enough. Part of the reason for their letter, and we know that for a fact, they came out and said, excuse me, the Minister of Finance, who is also partially a defense minister, said we should wipe out the village in Hawara in the Palestine territory. And since this is a minister in Israel's government, that this is the type of things that he is saying, we are unwilling to participate in any such process that will lead Israel to be undemocratic. And I think that's a moment of a big crisis. I mean, from the pilots in Israel are the top of the elite. From there, it can go down to everywhere.
Okay. Arabs, thank God, Palestinians don't serve in the army, so we are not part of this debate, Professor Amal. But in the beginning of the protestings, lots of articles and opinions and interpreters talked about where's the Palestinians, where's the Arab citizen against this government. It's fascist, right-wing, very violent government, and the first people who will pay the price will be Palestinian citizens of Israel. So why they are missing them from Kaplan or Rabin Square in Tel Aviv? Where are the Palestinian citizens?
Well, first of all, we have to understand the context. As I said before, for an average Israeli high-tech person or a military person, Israel is a Jewish and democratic state. And they go out to protest in order to defend this democratic and Jewish state according to certain values and certain views that actually meet their expectations or met their expectations so far. And that's why they are against changing or transforming Israel from what it used to be into something else that they consider not to be democratic anymore. Now, for an average Israeli Palestinian citizen, the situation is not as rosy as an average Israeli would say. For Palestinians, there are two main reasons why they are not participating. The first reason is actually substantial. In their view, when you reduce the judicial reform to its to the balance of power between the legislative and the executive vis-a-vis the judicial system, for the average Palestinian citizen, the judicial system has not been fair to him or her since 1948.
It's a fact, like by numbers.
Yes, of course. Of course, when we look at the decisions, the crucial, substantial decision made by the High Court in Israel, vis-a-vis the Palestinian citizens, they were not actually guaranteeing equality and freedom and full legitimacy of their participation in the Israeli life, economically, socially, politically, and so on and so on. So when people protest in order to defend the High Court, Arab citizens meet a problem. If you go out and protest in the name of defending the High Court, actually you are contrasting, or you are creating a contradiction between your experience at what you are calling for or protesting for. This is one thing. This is a substantial issue. For the second substantial issue is actually that the call made by the protesters is to defend the Israeli democracy. And for Palestinian citizens, this democracy has not been that democratic for them. The Israeli democracy has discriminated against them, and they call it actually a procedural majoritarian system rather than a democracy. Yes, there are elections, there is a majority rule in Israel, but the majority rule is automatic because it's based on national affiliation, and the Jewish majority actually promoted every decision possible vis-a-vis the Arab-Palestinian community as a result of its automatic majority in the parliament. Limiting the legitimacy of Arab participation in the parliament based on certain laws. I can't go into the details now. So participating in defending democracy is problematic.
Even though our leadership, the Palestinian leadership and the legal or the political parties state that they are with the revolution, with the protesters, and they support, but it wasn't translated by like massive buses of people who want to participate.
Well, the
Abbas,
yeah,
like they say like we are with you, but we are not with you in the streets.
In the protest, and this is good. You point something important, very important, because the practical, I mentioned the substantial reason. The practical reason is that the Jewish majority protesting in the streets have drawn clear lines conditioning the participation of the Palestinians. At the beginning, if you remember, and Tal definitely remembers, that some people in the protesters said, we don't want to see Palestinian flag. So
there were very few flags with this,
of course,
like,
but
tsunami
of Israeli flags.
Flag,
and so they pointed out the limits and the boundaries of legitimate participation in the protest, and therefore Palestinians citizens say, if we want to come within this tsunami, as you call it, Israeli flags and Israeli patriotism, we don't feel at home at all unless we come in order to protest our own grievances, in order to bring our own voice. And our voice is Palestinian because we are discriminated against in the Israeli system for being Palestinian, not for being from Sweden or from somewhere else. So if we want to protest, we have to bring this voice also. And the Israeli protesters, Jewish protesters, have to accept us as integral part of this protest in order to democratize Israel. Not having this ability makes them decide, to stay at home. I think this is what explains their behavior, although I think their leadership, as you said, as well as the Arab-Palestinian elite inside Israel, still supports morally, spiritually, and even sometimes practically, as we saw in Haifa in last weekend, they do support the protest. They're not on the other side of, they fully understand.
Not watching, like
no, they're not watching neutrally, and they are not supporting whatsoever the spirit of this revolution. In the sense, they are against this reform because they know at the end of the day, it will lead to even deepening the discrimination against them within the state.
We don't have this
and will lead to annexation of the occupied part of the occupied territory. So they understand the game. But because of what I said before, they want to stay home. And last reason is that a wide Arab participation in the protest may lead to split within the Jewish protesters. And they understand this. There is what I call collective rationality in this decision not to go there, in order to enable as much as cohesiveness and cohesion within the protest movement, in order not to lead to split within it, those who want the Arab to participate and those who don't want the Arabs to participate. And that's why actually it's a win-win situation. for the Arab community. They spiritually there, they support it, but without paying the price of being there, without having their identity welcomed, as well as they disable the coalition, the governing coalition, from leading to a split or disputes within the protest movement.
We'll go back to the Palestinian, the West Bank, of what's happening in Hawara and the Palestinian cities of Jenin and Nablus in a moment. But Tal, going back to you, the president, he's trying to, we call it in Arabic, sulha, to compromise or to reconciliate with and to negotiate with the opposition and the coalition, and everybody's like ignoring him. Is there any chance by this move of the president? So
yeah, the president, we all know, came from Israel's left. He came from the labor. He was always liberal and left.
But he was elected by Netanyahu.
Sorry?
He was elected as a president by the support of the Likud, right?
But before that, he was a politician growing up in the Labor Party of Israel. He was the chairman of the opposition. I'm saying this because he has many statements that are on record that we can find today in videos and other places where he spoke against judicial reform. So we know his opinion for a fact. He spoke even against basic parts of this judicial overhaul, judicial coup. In the past. So right now, when he's trying to overcome the gaps between the sides, to my understanding, he doesn't say this is the solution that I'm coming up with. He's suggesting some sort of a space between the sides, like that they can decide. Now, one thing he said immediately, he said, I'm expecting the coalition to stop the legislation immediately for 14 days in order to make it, to get into a discussion on where they can, what terms they, there may be some parts of this that they can agree on. At least one person from the opposition, which is Benny Gantz, suggested it on his own agenda. And he, there's one part of this coup that Benny Gantz was willing to talk about. Not all of it, I have to say. Most of the parts of the judicial coup, Benny Gantz rejected. But there was one component of the override clause where he was willing to talk about override clause by 80 people of the Knesset. Now, the president did not say, did not point to any specifics, but he gave us this space, and he suggested come to the president's house because the president was elected by a huge majority of the Knesset members. He can work with all of them. The coalition, the government led by Netanyahu, rejected this immediately and said, we're not going to stop the legislation. And for to prove their ability, they voted for in the first reading, and the first reading has passed.
Yeah.
So everybody said, immediately after the first reading, they will come to their, to terms. They will try to negotiate because they wanted to show their ability, and now they can negotiate. We know for a fact it's almost 2 weeks before the first reading took place, and no negotiation has started. And Herzog, who has very good negotiation skills and he is a very moderate person, is unable completely to bring the sides together.
Wow. I have the same impression. When I met him a few days ago, when we, as a women coalition, met him in person, trying to
good intentions,
with good intention, with like zero power. This is like very good, like good intention, and he really cared, but he didn't give us that much hope. Also,
if I may intervene, this shows the deep rift within Israeli society. If the president, who is symbolically the most important person in this country, is unable to at least bring the two sides to show
the same
good
role,
intentions, especially the government, especially the coalition, who is the ruling, actually the most responsible party in this regard, is unable to bring them to the table, it means that the rift is really deep and people are sticking to positions that unbridgeable, at least for the for now and for the coming future. What I wonder is when the president actually will come out and say who is responsible for the for this chaos and for the inability actually to start negotiations. We're not talking, he did not propose a solution. He actually proposed a roadmap that will enable or facilitate negotiations. Even this was not accepted by the coalition. The coalition wants to continue with the legislation and is inviting the opposition to come while the legislation is going on. Although the president, in his first point, actually in the roadmap, said that the legislation has to stop in order for negotiations to take place. So not listening to the president is also another proof that this coalition does not respect the institutions in this country, does not respect the division of power in the Israeli political system and in the country, and this that does not respect the president as we should have expected them to do. So I think there is a breakdown in the way people look at the system entirely, and I think the center left is sticking to its opposition to what's going on exactly because of this point, because they know the right-wing government does not care whatsoever about the law, about the system. In general, they want to promote their own agenda, and that agenda has two main things. One, to substantially abolish democracy in order to enable them to promote the second goal, which has to do with, mainly has to do with what the nationalist religious parties and ultra-Orthodox parties within the government want, and that is exemption from military rule, from military service for the ultra-Orthodox, and partial annexation in the West Bank for the nationalist religious parties.
Why do you use the term partial annexation? Because they are talking about full annexation and ending the occupation. The plan of Bezalel Smotrich is just to beat up and win this war forever. This is his plan, and it's part of the coalition lines. And we saw what's happened in the last week with Hawara and the settlements, and we all the world heard his like vicious violence problematic statement about Hawara, but and this is not like partial annexation. This is like apartheid. It's coming.
Let's differentiate between the reality on the ground and the
legal.
The
settlers feel free that they can do whatever they want.
I don't think so. I think regarding the occupied territories, they want the land without the people. And there are around 3 million Palestinians living there. So they are trying to find a bypass road in order to enable the annexation of as much land as possible without having actually take responsibility for the Palestinian cities and the inhabitants, Palestinian inhabitants. That's why I say partial annexation. It means annexing the land without the people. And this functional differentiation is what is a compass leading their policy. That's why Smotrich, a very active settler and finance minister and partial minister in the defense ministry, that's why he wanted actually take responsibility of the civil administration in the West Bank in order to actually annex the settlements to Israel, which means applying the Israeli law to Jewish settlers there.
They already have.
They started actually. The second thing actually is to annex C area, what we call C area, and later on maybe finding a solution in order to deal with the Palestinian inhabitants in the cities. This gradual process force an apartheid situation in the West Bank, definitely. Now, in order not to call it, not to enable to call it apartheid, that's why they speak about the gradual process. And I think it's the end goal of the radical nationalist religious components of this government, with the agreement of I won't say large part, but some part of the Likud party. So this coalition is very dangerous, not only vis-a-vis, the Israeli democratic system and the judicial review accepted in the constitutional identity of the state, but also regarding, the conflict with the Palestinians. So it's creating a mess, actually. And that's why, and people protesting in Tel Aviv, in Jerusalem, and Haifa, and everywhere, and fully understand that if they don't stop it now, it's going to lead Israel to a place where it will become a pariah state that is ousted by in many international institutions, and indications are there. And the last point I want to indicate here is the economic crisis. The economic issue is very, very central. Israel plays the card of democracy, has become part of the democratic club worldwide, and therefore its economic exchange is very developed with Europe, with the United States, with some other countries, and it's normalizing a situation in the Middle East with some Arab countries and North Africa. And if this government manages to actually pass the laws it wants to pass and create the judicial revolt, revolution, call it what you want, it's going to lead to a serious change in the location and the treatment of Israel worldwide, which will have ramifications on its economic ties, economic well-being, academic exchanges, and of course military and strategic interests.
Okay. Let's take a few questions from our overseas friends, and thank you for lots of questions here. And it's from all over the world, I have to say. But let's start with the US.
Okay.
So our friend David asking, should the progressive Zionist Jewish community, and you spent a few years in the US and you covered the US politics and the Israeli politics for many years, Tal, is there anything that Jewish liberal democratic supporters of Israel can do in their country?
Yes, I do. I think so. Obviously, I think you are now watching a possibility of collapsing of the democratic state. It's a democratic and Jewish state. It can remain Jewish and democratic in name only. If you are, a supporter of the state of Israel, of a democratic and Jewish state of Israel, then you need to, make it heard.
We see the statement that 120 Jewish leaders signed yesterday against Smotrich visa and invitation.
The finance minister is actually traveling to DC in a couple of days. He's not banned yet. Yeah. He's traveling to DC in a couple of days for a conference of the Israel's bonds. This is a conference that the goal is, as you all know, the bonds is the vehicle or the way that the Israeli government is looking for money or trying to get money. It's a bond raise. It's been in place for many years. Now the finance minister of this country is traveling to Washington DC in order to ask liberal Jews, right? Because most of the Jewish community of the United States is liberal and is democratic, and Jewish and democratic, is traveling there in order to ask them for support for something that is for us going to have the country is going to lose its reputation and its democratic value. I mean, we are deteriorating in democratic value as it is. But if this judicial overall or judicial coup, and excuse me, my friend, for not calling it a reform, I don't think it's a reform at all. It's a coup, or it's overhaul. Then what is the money for? What is the money for? It's this money will come to end the rule of law of Israel's Supreme Court. This money is coming to get the government the control of the Supreme Court. The government will appoint Supreme Court judges. The judges will have to make decisions according to the government's wishes. This money will help create a situation where the
What do you
Israel's
expect the Jewish U.S. citizen to do? Like if they have the power, they have like
read as much as you can about the judicial overhaul and make your voices heard. Israel's WASNS is obviously an organization that is needs to know, has a relationship with other organizations. We all know how the Jewish organization of the United States are working. They are interconnected. They are affecting one another. They have umbrella organizations. They can talk to each other.
they're very well organized, I have to say.
They're very well organized. We know, for example, that some Jewish that are leaders that are either conservative, Republicans or conservative, or never mind, they're not just the liberal left of the United States. We all know that many of them think that this judicial overhaul is devastating for the country. We just heard from Bloomberg. We heard from the former Justice Minister of Canada, Kotler. We heard from Alan Dershowitz, so we never consider him to be a liberal, lefty Jew, and many others. I just heard today from Peter Berkovich, who was a part of the Trump administration, sitting in a very high position in the State Department. He wrote a whole article how this is ruining the fracture of the country. So, even David Friedman, the ambassador from the Trump administration,
the biggest supporter of the settlements.
He said that the override clause will ruin the country. So you have the right and left Jewish leaders from the United States who need to take a step and do something about this. As much as you can do. I'm not even talking about entry of Smotrich. I don't think this is specific the issue. Once he enters, I know there are planned demonstrations, and
you know that, like it's something is
if you know, it's out in the public. It's all over the place. There is a demonstration that is going to take place against the conference. He is not invited to meet any administration's officials whatsoever. I don't think they're going to ban his entry, but there is so many tools between just listening to us and all the way to banning his entry. There's so many tools
He's not really welcome, like
he's not welcome, but maybe he will cancel his trip from his own understanding that this is. By the way, when he was in the opposition before he became a minister, he traveled to Britain.
The UK,
the Jewish community of Britain issued both in their papers and in their Twitter feeds, issue a statement, a harsh statement. And again, this was just based on his homophobic statements from the past. It was not even in
Palestinian goals and settlements. It's about
it was just about his statements that he made in the past. They issued a very harsh statement saying, you're not welcome here, and you can take the first plane and go back to the country where you came from. We are not welcoming you. And this is the biggest Jewish organization of the UK. They were very, very clear about this.
We are very proud of our British friends.
They were not mincing words. They tweeted that. We do have some Jewish organization in the last couple of days that tweeted. One of them is the Israeli Policy Forum, and others already tweeted and issued statements. So,
Okay, so you talk about the support and supporters. Let's go to Europe, and we have lots of friends. And Professor Jamal, you're very involved in the civil society movement in Israel, shared society, freedom of speech, democracy, feminist organization. We all use and been supporting also Wahdat Salam Nabi Shalom, supported by donors from overseas, big organizations like DVIC, the EU, the USAID, and other resources like our work. This is the majority of our budgets come from the foreign country who do care about what's happening here. And this government is going to track the human rights organization and shared society organization, and they have a few plans for us. Can you tell our friends about this very dangerous tasks reform that they are want to legalize soon?
I think, I mean, again, a historical look could be very illuminating. When the Netanyahu government, the second Netanyahu government, 2009, entered power, entered office at the time, one of the most important legislation they wanted to pass actually is to limit funding for human rights organizations and social change NGOs. And actually they changed the law in order to enforce limits on the ability of civil society to have enough funds in order to promote certain goals and defend human rights in Israel, and defend, of course, the weak components of the Israeli society. So this has been, part of the agenda of the right-wing governments for a long time. And when we look at, proposals of the laws that were put on the table in the past, you see one of the main important targets is actually to define, any official support, any support from what is called in the Israeli discourse foreign entity as a target. Any funds from foreign entity is marked, and people has to, NGOs have to announce them clearly in their budgets in order to enable, the government to follow these organizations and delegitimize them. Now, we have to also understand that the government has been assisted so far by right-wing civil society organizations that target liberal and human rights organizations, and actually delegitimize them by stigmatizing them and bashing them, calling them, supporting terror acts against Israel, calling for the, calling for, trialing Israeli military officers in the international court in Europe, and so on and so on. So this targeting of civil society has been problematic for a long period of time. And I think what we see now is the importance actually of supporting civil, liberal and human rights organizations in this country. Without these organizations that are leading now the protests, that are protesting against this constitutional coup, it's not only judicial coup, right. It's actually constitutional coup. If I call it, this is the most accurate name for it, is actually trying to promote constitutional change that is unconstitutional, because it goes against the fundamental and basic values and principles of the state. And I think civil society organizations are very crucial in order to mobilize society, in order to make people aware of what's going on, as well as, lobbying for liberal rights and civil rights in Europe, in North America, in other parts of the world. And the support, foreign support for these organizations has become very crucial, as we have seen, or as we see in the last few weeks. And that's why the war with the government.
Two questions regarding that. Claudia and Ed from our friend from the Netherlands and Holland, and they are asking if they're like something that they can do in their governments, in their countries, as individuals or organizations or media activists in Europe to do something to help.
Well, first of all, funding is very fundamental. It's very fundamental for civil society. I think financially supporting civil society in this country is very important. And they have to choose side, in the sense that, they have to support, if they want to support really something, they have to support liberal and human rights organizations. This is one thing. The other thing is Israel has exchange relations, diplomatic, strategic, economic, and so on with Europe and, the United States. In Europe, specifically, governments could practice some pressure on the Israeli government if they want, because the Israeli government knows its strategic ties with Europe is very fundamental for the persistence of this country.
But Michael is asking if they have to wait to this to happen or to do something, you know.
I think they have to lobby their own governments. They have to lobby the European Commission in Brussels. They have to do everything possible in order to, you know, put pressure on their governments to do something vis-a-vis the Israeli government.
Is there something that we can do for them? Because this is like a very small information. They don't have the full picture.
Of course, I mean,
because everybody's talking about the reform and the, you know.
They can read more about what's going on here. They have to fully understand that it's an unconstitutional constitutional change. It's transforming the constitutional identity of the state from a situation that has been problematic to some extent to much more problematic if they let it go. And I think what we can do is provide them with information. I mean, they are welcome to read, you know, Israeli news in English, as well as Israeli academics who are deeply involved. I mean, there are many, many discussions. The Israeli Democracy Institute, I participated in a round table about 10 days ago. You know, other NGOs are running discussions in English. They can follow. I think there's no lack of information for people who are interested to know what's going on. The issue is that, you know, each one in his or her place has to do what is they're obliged to do in order to be, you know, be loyal to human rights and liberal rights.
Sure,
and I think this is a very critical juncture in the history of this country, in order to avoid a civil war, in order to avoid deteriorating the situation into an apartheid situation in the West Bank, worse than it is now, and in order to actually, I think, save the fundamental rights of the Jewish majority in Israel to have the right to defend itself, to have the right for self-determination. And I think this is very important because we are talking about a very sensitive reality in this country, in which the same principles that actually legitimated the foundation of the state and the right of Jews for self-determination is being attacked. And therefore, it's paradoxical reality that we have to, you know, defend the same rights that allow this country to persist. But we have to be aware that this country cannot continue the way it used to be. This constitutional change is very dangerous, but if we want to be loyal to liberal and human rights values, we have to democratize the entire system and not be satisfied with only defending what has been here so far.
Thank you. Bill, want to understand more. It's really a connection between this chaos and the past legalization and new laws and with the Netanyahu's cases, like the personal cases and accusation against him. Is this is really gonna influence the results of his trials? You know, can he, you know, found guilty in his cases, or they didn't understand, Bill? They want to understand this laws reduce the chances that Netanyahu will be convicted.
So as per the first instance, this is the district court. The judges are already are working on the case, and we don't know the results yet, but obviously it's an ongoing process of witnesses and so on. The problem is that the new judicial overall will be able to appoint judges to the Supreme Court. And once they appoint all the judges or some of the judges to the Supreme Court, they are also one of the suggestions, which is in the bills at the moment, is to have the government choose the president of the Supreme Court. Now, the president of the Supreme Court is a very important role in the whole mix. Once the trial in the district court will be done, there will be an appeal to the High Court. The president of the Supreme Court will decide what panel will sit in the appeal. Obviously, they can pick and choose, cherry pick their own judges, and then you can imagine what's going to happen in the appeal. That's one aspect that I think is very problematic.
This is the scenario that
it's not a far-fetched scenario, since the bill to change the way they select judges has already passed the first reading. They can pass it easily until the end of March. So when you ask what to do in the next, the next couple of weeks is very crucial. And this specific bill to change the way they select judges, this bill is in one of the first bills that is on the agenda. So that's one point. The other point is there is another, there's a couple of other sets of bills that are personally related to Netanyahu. For example, they are now changing, the announcement of incapable. There is a term in the code, in the bills at the moment that says, when does a prime minister become disabled or incapable? They already put forward another bill to limit the scope. So you can only announce on a prime minister that is incapable to conduct the business of the country if he's gravely sick or something like that. So today, the ability to announce is much more wider for other causes. So this bill already passed. I can go on and on. There is so many other suggestions at the moment to save Netanyahu from his own trial. They can, they're
very creative.
They're very creative. They've been talking during the campaign. It's personal. They didn't put it on the table at the moment, but they were talking during the campaign to take off the penal code, the breach of trust felony, such that if you take it off the penal code, it's very easy. It's just a very simple vote. You take it off the penal code. The trials around the country that are ongoing on breach of trust are all dropped immediately. Obviously, we know just one trial that is going on breach of trust. This is the prime minister trial. So if that happens, the bribery charges will stay. The breach of trust will be dropped. I don't see that happening right now at the moment. This is the second wave of the judicial coup, which will come in 6 months from now.
So there is like a highway between this.
Of course,
and
it's more than a highway. This is the pretext. This is the reason for that we're experiencing this judicial overhaul. The coup is based on personal reasons. The reason, and I'm not saying this is just as a guess or an assumption. We all know that Netanyahu sat in front of TV cameras many times during between 2009 and 2017. Many times he said a democracy needs a very powerful judicial system that is separated in its powers from the rest of the branches of the government. He said it again and again during judges' ceremonies, nominations, and during the ceremonies to nominate judges. He said that in interviews. We have at least a dozen of his interviews claiming how good it is that we have a very effective and independent Supreme Court, because this is they call it the defender of the country in international bodies. Now, all of this collapsed immediately in 2018. Why did it collapse? Only because of his own personal criminal problems.
Okay, I have a very optimistic question from Brigitta. She's one of our Swedish friends, and she is asking, do you see any chance that the left wing in the country take over in order to save the democracy? And do you see a suitable solution for the conflict under the present coalition?
Well, for the left to take over,
what do you think? Like, let's talk about the left.
This is the tragic future of the Israeli left wing, or center left wing, actually, liberals. Demographically, the composition of the Israeli society is such that the majority is becoming more and more ultra-religious, nationalist religious, and very right-wing. Demographically. When we look at surveys, we see in the last 20-25 years, the IDI, the Israeli Democracy Institute, published the index of democracy, and you see that more and more people support right-wing conservative values in this country, and this belief or this trust in the judicial system, and this has to do with the demographic composition of this country. the tragic thing about it is part of the Orthodox community that does not serve in the army actually, and does not contribute to the Israeli economy, has a lot of power influencing decision-making in this country. And it's leading, actually, it's pushing the country with the Orthodox national religious components, pushing this country to a very problematic place. The only way the center left can actually win elections in the future is by cooperating with the Arab community. We're talking about 20% of the Israeli society. We're talking about 18% of the Israeli electorate. They can vote at least, they can bring at least 18 to 19 MKs to the Knesset. And this could change the entire composition of the Israeli government in the future. The problem is that part of the center left is not willing to cooperate with the Arab parties, not thinking or hoping that they can convince that they can. Well, what we tried with Gantz in 2019, the joint list supported Gantz's nomination for prime minister, and he got cold feet and did not dare compose a coalition with the Arab parties. Now, this is not, a final statement. I think this center left, part of which is the core of the Israeli economic and military system, will have to understand that they have no future with the radicalizing right in Israel. That the only democratic civic future of this country is and could be through the cooperation with the Arab community.
You think they learned the lesson, both the Arab citizens
I
and
think
the Jewish citizens?
Otherwise they raise their hands and they give up or give in to the right-wing parties. I mean, they have no choice. History,
it's a very painful lesson, actually.
Historical lessons are not easy to learn and have a heavy price. And I hope this country will not pay a very heavy price or a devastating price until people copy and understand that without civilizing this country, without cooperation between Jews and Arabs, and establishing a shared society based on principles that both sides can respect and can accept and comply with. Without this, I think we are going to a very problematic place.
I think the only equation that we know that might be working is real democracy for all.
Of course, that's what I'm talking about. And without it, there's no future. Now, it doesn't mean actually that it's going to happen in the near future. That's why I'm saying that history tells us that in many countries, I mean, France, after the French Revolution, has to go through Napoleon and Robespierre and Napoleon in order to learn that democracy has its own principles. I mean, look at what's going on in Egypt now, because the Egyptians did not learn the historical lesson. Look at what's going on in Tunisia, okay, and look at what's going on in Turkey, Hungary, Poland, Brazil, the Philippines, and so on and so on. We have comparative lessons enough to understand that you cannot square the cycle in democracy, and democracy has institutional dimension as well as substantial dimension based in certain principles, and they have to go together. Without bringing them together, you cannot establish a democracy, and without taking into consideration all components of the social fabric in Israel, including the right wing, by the way, including the Orthodox, including the periphery in this country, without including them in determining the constitutional identity of the state, you will not have a democracy stable for the future.
Any comments to conclude our panel today?
Just to put the question about the left being able to come together. I mean, what we see right now is the Israel's protesters, mostly I think centrist and liberal lefties, are not in any mood to listen to their own leaders, to which they voted just a couple of months ago. Yair Lapid, Benny Gantz, and Merav Michaeli. The group of those leaders are basically now off the table. The crowds are not listening to them anymore. I mean, you can see this very strongly if you go to the protest. The leaders of those parties are somewhat not part of the discussion of the discourse. For example, some of them call for reserve duty and military officers not to disobey or not to, not to sign off from the military. And the crowds is already, very far away from those statements. So I see now a disconnection between the Israeli left and their leaders. I don't think that, I think some of the people realize they will not be able to go into power in the next generation. And for that, they're taking it to the streets. They see no other choice than the streets, the economy, the military, as we said earlier. This is their tools to protest against this government. That's their ability, and probably they're not going to be a big player in the Knesset for time to come.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry.
This is not finishing optimistically.
Not giving you a more optimistic view,
Yeah.
but if you want to look for an optimistic point,
Please.
you do see the high engagement of the crowds. I mean, we are now seeing demonstrations. I know the Arabs are not part of it, unfortunately, but the
In spirit they are.
in spirit they are, as
Yes,
you said
in spirit-
earlier,
in
they
spirit they
don't
are.
want even to disturb because they think it may be harmful.
Yeah.
But the amount of people and the amount of activism and the amount of the creativity of the protesters, this is something Israel has never seen. We are now in a historic day. We have never seen anything like that before.
And like week by week, because this is the ninth
week, the 10th
next
week
and
coming
this
up.
is going
Yeah.
bigger and bigger. And
Yes.
I think it's the thing. For me, the optimistic side is the new. It's not new, but what's happening in Kaplan and the movement of there is no democracy with the occupation and against the apartheid, and there were Palestinian flags in that corner, and the thousands show up, and it's part of the big.
So you had a big protest of Jews and Arabs in Hawara on Friday. So that became another
Haifa too.
symbol.
Many Arabs participated in Haifa. Yeah.
Mixed cities,
But I see this as a thing. And I think it's much more easier also to connect what's happening to minorities and marginalized communities with the Ethiopian, with the Mizrahi, with the Palestinians and the occupation. And this is something, the new voices that we never didn't hear previously. And for me, I think it's a good sign. It's very, very modest and quiet, but it's there. And we have to keep the faith, I believe. Regarding the question about our work and what we do in WASNS Salam Neve Shalom, we became very active as a community, and the School for Peace, the parents in the school, both the community in the village and the education institutions actively participate of what's happening outside. And yesterday we also decided to launch a campaign to help rebuild Hawara High School as a humanitarian aid. You all know that we operate the school in WASNS Salam Neve Shalom, and education for peace is one of the tools that we use. And this is the moment of liberal, equal people Palestinian and Israelis who fight for justice against the occupation. So you are invited to join us in our activities, our campaigns, and to keep support our education institutions, the School for Peace, the Spiritual Center, and of course the primary school. And on behalf of the staff and the assistant behind the scene, I want to thank you both for this very thoughtful, important debate that we have here. And I hope that our audience understand a little bit in depth what's happening and what we are involved in and what we are facing, and keep contact us in any platform you see it's good for all. Thank you all. Thank our friends all over in Europe and the US. And we will see you next month in our next event. Thank you.